What happens when a morning talk show meant for polite conversation turns into a live-wire collision between restraint and rage, between generations, between a Hollywood actor carrying unspoken pressure and a television icon who never flinches? What happens when smiles harden, silence screams, and the room realizes, too late, that something has gone off script? Before we go any further, subscribe to Stage View, hit like, and drop a comment right now, because moments like this don't just happen, they explode. The studio lights were already hot when Miles Teller walked onto the set of The View. Not the kind of heat you can wipe away with a handkerchief, but the kind that presses against your skin, the kind that makes even seasoned actors feel exposed. Applause rolled in waves from the audience, polite but curious, the sound of people who sensed something sharper beneath the surface. Miles smiled, practiced and careful. The smile of a man who had done press tours before and knew exactly how much of himself to give away. Whoopi Goldberg watched him from her seat with a stillness that could only belong to someone who had been doing this longer than most people in the room had been alive. She didn't lean forward. She didn't nod eagerly. She observed. Behind her tinted glasses, her eyes were already working, already measuring the weight of the man approaching the table. Miles shook hands, exchanged quick greetings, and settled into his chair. The table separated them, but not by much. Just polished wood and a few inches of air. Enough space to pretend there was distance. Not enough to stop what was coming. At first, everything followed the rhythm viewers expected. Light banter. A joke about the weather. A comment about Miles' latest project. The audience laughed at the right moments. The cameras glided smoothly from face to face, capturing smiles that hadn't yet learned how temporary they were. But inside Miles' chest, something was tightening. He had agreed to this appearance, knowing the reputation of the show. The View wasn't a place you came to hide. It was a place where questions arrived sharpened, where opinions weren't wrapped in soft language. His team had warned him, be calm, be respectful, don't bite. Miles nodded at the advice, confident in his ability to stay composed. Still, as Whoopi leaned back slightly and folded her hands, there was a shift. It wasn't dramatic. Most viewers wouldn't catch it on first watch. But Miles did. Whoopi spoke calmly, her voice even seasoned. "You've been very open lately about the pressures of Hollywood, about feeling misunderstood," she said. "Some people hear that and think, it sounds a little out of touch." The audience murmured softly, a collective intake of breath. Miles smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "I don't think talking about pressure means I'm ungrateful," he replied. "It just means I'm human." Whoopi tilted her head. "Sure, but when you're standing where millions of people would love to stand, don't you think context matters?" There it was. The first crack. Miles shifted in his seat. The studio lights reflected off his jaw as it tightened, the camera catching it in unforgiving clarity. He inhaled slowly, the way his acting coach once taught him when emotions threatened to spill. "I think context matters," he said carefully. "But so does honesty." Whoopi nodded once. Not agreement, acknowledgement. "Honesty is important," she said. "So is listening." That word landed heavier than it should have. Listening. Miles' smile faded just a little. "I do listen," he said. "But sometimes it feels like people decide what you're allowed to feel before you even open your mouth." The audience reacted now, a ripple of whispers, a few scattered claps, the sound of sides quietly forming in real time. Whoopi leaned forward. "Miles," she said, her tone firm but not raised. "Nobody's saying you're not allowed to feel anything. What I'm saying is, when you speak, it carries weight. And weight comes with responsibility." For a split second, Miles said nothing. Silence on live television is never empty. It's crowded. It's loud in ways sound can't capture. The cameras zoomed in, producers frozen behind the monitors, unsure whether to cut away or let it ride. Miles exhaled through his nose, a sharp breath he couldn't hide. "With respect," he said, and the words felt rehearsed even to him. "I don't think it's fair to assume I'm irresponsible just because I'm honest about my experience." Whoopi's lips pressed together. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. "I didn't call you irresponsible." "No," Miles said quickly, too quickly. "But you implied it." There it was. The temperature in the room spiked. Audience members shifted in their seats. One woman in the front row raised her eyebrows, sensing the turn. The other hosts exchanged glances. This wasn't the playful debate they'd expected. Whoopi removed her glasses slowly and placed them on the table. It was a small action, but it carried decades of meaning. When Whoopi Goldberg looked at you without glasses, she wasn't playing. "Miles," she said, I've been doing this a long time. I choose my words carefully. Miles' hands clenched under the table. Then maybe you should choose them even more carefully when you're talking about me. An audible gasp broke from the audience. The sound echoed against the studio walls, impossible to edit out. Whoopi's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. Excuse me? I'm sitting right here, Miles continued, his voice louder now, the restraint slipping. And it feels like you're talking over me, not with me. One of the co-hosts tried to interject, her voice light, nervous. Okay, let's. Whoopi raised a hand. The room froze again. No, she said quietly. Let him speak. Miles blinked, surprised. For a moment, the anger on his face tangled with something else. Relief, maybe, or the shock of being challenged and invited forward at the same time. Thank you, he said, but the words came out sharp. I came here to talk about my work, not to be lectured about how grateful I should be to exist. The sentence hit like a dropped glass. Whoopi leaned back, studying him. Nobody lectured you about existing. It feels like it, Miles shot back. Every time someone like me says something real, it gets framed as whining. The audience noise swelled, some applause, some discomfort, some outright tension. This wasn't a clean fight. It was messy, human, unresolved. Whoopi folded her arms. You think this is about someone like you? She asked. Miles didn't hesitate. Yes, I do. And just like that, the conversation crossed into deeper territory. Ego, generational divides, power, perception. The cameras stayed close, catching every twitch, every flicker of emotion Miles hadn't planned to reveal. Whoopi's voice was steady, but edged now. Careful, she said. When you start talking in generalities, you risk missing the point. Miles laughed once, humorless. I think the point's been missed already. A producer's voice crackled faintly in an earpiece somewhere off camera, urging caution, urging transition. No one listened. The audience sat suspended between fascination and fear, aware they were witnessing something unscripted, something that would be replayed, dissected, slowed down, captioned, and argued over long after the lights went dark. Miles leaned forward, eyes locked on Whoopi now. I respect you, he said. But respect goes both ways. Whoopi met his gaze without blinking. Then show it. The words hung there, heavy and final, as the room seemed to collectively hold its breath. Knowing this was no longer just an interview, but the beginning of a moment neither of them could take back. And somewhere, in the quiet chaos between two strong wills colliding on live television, the story was only just getting started. The silence after Whoopi's words felt heavier than any argument. It wasn't the kind of pause producers love. It was dangerous, raw, alive. Miles Teller sat frozen for half a heartbeat, his body leaning forward as if momentum alone might carry him through what he'd just walked into. The studio lights hummed softly overhead, indifferent to the tension crackling beneath them. For a brief moment, Miles looked down at the table. Not in defeat, but in recalibration. Inside his head, thoughts collided. You're on live television. Millions are watching. Don't lose this. But there was another voice too, louder now, the one that had followed him through red carpets and rehearsals. The one that whispered that staying silent had never actually protected him. When he looked back up, his eyes were sharper. I am showing it, Miles said, his voice steadier than before, but edged with something unmistakably emotional. Respect doesn't mean agreeing. It means not dismissing where someone's coming from. A few audience members clapped instinctively, then stopped, unsure if it was appropriate. The applause echoed awkwardly, dying out as quickly as it began. Whoopi watched him carefully. This wasn't the first heated guest she'd faced. Not even close. But there was something about Miles' intensity, less polished, more personal, that made the exchange feel less like television and more like a private argument that had accidentally wandered into public view. Dismissal isn't what's happening here, Whoopi said. Challenges. Miles shook his head. That's easy to say when you're the one holding the microphone. The co-hosts stiffened. One of them inhaled sharply, eyes darting toward the cameras, then back to Whoopi. The producers were definitely panicking now. This wasn't on the rundown. This wasn't safe territory. Whoopi's voice dropped, calm but unmistakably firm. You think I don't know what power looks like? Miles hesitated. Just a fraction. Enough for the audience to feel it. I think, he said slowly, that power can be invisible to the people who have it. A collective O rippled through the room. Whoopi leaned back again, crossing her legs, her posture relaxed but deliberate. That's an interesting statement, she said. Coming from someone with your platform. Miles laughed again, but this time there was pain in it. You keep circling back to that. like success cancels out struggle. It changes the scale, Whoopi replied immediately. And pretending it doesn't, that's where people lose patience. The camera cut briefly to the audience. A young man nodded vigorously. An older woman frowned, arms crossed. 2 rows back, someone whispered, "This is getting uncomfortable." Back at the table, Miles' jaw flexed. "So what's the acceptable way to talk about pressure?" he asked. "What's the approved script?" "Smile, say thank you, and pretend everything's fine." Whoopi didn't answer right away. She studied him, really looked at him now. Not as a guest, as a person. "No," she said finally. "The acceptable way is to recognize that when you speak, other people hear you through their own pain." Miles leaned back slightly, frustration flashing across his face. "I'm not responsible for everyone else's interpretation." The audience reacted instantly, some murmurs of agreement, some sharp disapproval. The room split audibly, emotion drawing invisible lines across the seats. Whoopi raised an eyebrow. "You're responsible for impact, whether you like it or not." That word again. Impact. Miles' hands came up now, palms open, a gesture that was half defense, half surrender. "Do you hear how that sounds?" he asked. "Like I'm supposed to carry the emotional weight of strangers just because I talk about my own life." One of the co-hosts finally tried again, her voice almost pleading. "Maybe we can." "No," Miles said, not looking away from Whoopi. The interruption slipped out before he could stop it. The audience gasped louder this time. Whoopi turned her head slightly toward him. "Do not cut people off," she said, her tone controlled but unmistakably sharp. Miles froze. His face flushed, not with anger now, but with the realization of what he'd just done. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "That wasn't." Whoopi nodded once. Apology accepted. The tension shifted, but it didn't disappear. It transformed, less explosive, more intimate. Like a storm settling into a relentless downpour. Miles took a breath. A real one this time. "I'm not trying to be dismissive," he said, softer now. "I'm trying to be honest about how isolating this industry can feel." Whoopi's expression softened just slightly. "Isolation isn't new," she said. "But perspective keeps you grounded." "And what if perspective is exactly what I'm talking about?" Miles asked. "What if the image people have of me doesn't match reality at all?" The room went quiet again. Not shocked this time. Attentive. Whoopi folded her hands together. "Then say that," she said, "without framing it like the world owes you understanding." Miles shook his head slowly. "That's not what I'm saying. It's how it's landing," Whoopi replied. The words hung between them, heavy but honest. Miles stared at the table again, his reflection faintly visible in the polished surface. For the first time since the confrontation began, his shoulders dropped slightly. "I didn't expect this," he admitted. "I came in ready to talk about my film. Not this." Whoopi allowed a small, knowing smile. "That's the view," she said. "You don't always get what you expect." A nervous chuckle rippled through the audience, grateful for even a hint of levity. But the emotional weight remained. Miles looked back up. "I just want to be heard without being told I should feel lucky for breathing." Whoopi met his gaze. "And I want you to understand that being heard doesn't mean being agreed with." They stared at each other, neither backing down, neither attacking now. The clash had evolved, no longer just heat, but something closer to confrontation with purpose. Somewhere off camera, a producer counted down time left in the segment. The clock was ticking. Decisions had to be made. And as the tension settled into something quieter but no less intense, it became clear to everyone watching. This wasn't the peak. It was the turning point. The shift was subtle, but it was there. The kind of shift that only happens when anger runs out of fuel and something heavier takes its place. Vulnerability. The audience felt it before they understood it, leaning forward almost in unison, sensing that the sharp edges of the exchange were giving way to something more dangerous than shouting. Honesty. Miles Teller sat back fully now, his spine pressing into the chair, as if grounding himself. His eyes flicked briefly toward the audience, then back to Whoopi. The adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation was fading, leaving behind the ache of exposure. "You're right," he said quietly. The words surprised even him. "Being heard doesn't mean being agreed with." Whoopi nodded once, slowly. She didn't interrupt. She didn't seize the moment. She let the silence do the work. "But," Miles continued, his voice steady but raw, "it hurts when it feels like the conversation starts from the assumption that I don't know how lucky I am." A murmur of agreement rippled through part of the audience. Someone whispered, Let him talk. Another shook their head, unconvinced. Whoopi rested her forearms on the table. Let me ask you something, she said. When people criticize what you say, do you hear it as correction or as attack? Miles frowned, thinking. Honestly, he said, it usually feels like an attack. Why? Whoopi asked, not accusatory, genuinely curious. Miles hesitated. His throat tightened. Because it feels like people are more interested in knocking me down than understanding what I'm trying to say. That landed differently. Softer. Heavier. The cameras caught Whoopi's reaction. A slight narrowing of the eyes, not in judgment, but in recognition. She'd heard this before. From actors. From musicians. From activists. From people who'd learned too late that visibility doesn't come with armor. You think that feeling is unique to you? She asked. Miles shook his head. No, but that doesn't make it easier. A beat passed. The audience was silent now, not split, not murmuring, listening. Whoopi leaned back, exhaling slowly. You know, she said, when I was coming up, there wasn't room to talk about feelings the way there is now. You kept your head down, or you didn't work. Miles nodded. That sounds brutal. It was, she replied. But it taught me something. Miles waited. It taught me that when people push back, it's not always to silence you. Sometimes it's to remind you that your voice carries farther than you realize. Miles' jaw tightened again, but not defensively. Thoughtfully. And what if I'm still learning how to carry it? The question hung there, unguarded. Whoopi studied him for a long moment. The studio lights reflected faintly off the table between them, a barrier that now felt more symbolic than real. Then you listen, she said, even when it's uncomfortable. Miles let out a slow breath. I am listening. Are you? Whoopi asked. Not sharply. Gently. The audience held its breath. Miles' eyes dropped again, his fingers tapping lightly against the arm of his chair. When he spoke, his voice was lower. I didn't grow up thinking I'd be here, he said. I didn't grow up prepared for people to assume things about me. None of us do, Whoopi said. But the assumptions stick, Miles continued. They harden. And after a while, you stop knowing how to talk without being misunderstood. One of the co-hosts nodded slowly, visibly moved. Another wiped at the corner of her eye, hoping the camera hadn't caught it. Whoopi tilted her head. Then maybe the question isn't whether you should talk, she said. It's how. Miles looked up at her again. This time, there was no anger in his expression. Just fatigue. I don't know if I always get it right. Whoopi smiled faintly. Nobody does. A few audience members laughed softly, not out of humor but relief. The tension had cracked, not shattered but opened. Miles straightened in his chair. Can I say something without it being taken the wrong way? He asked. Whoopi gestured toward him. Go ahead. I respect you, he said again, but this time the words weren't sharp. They were earnest. That's why this hit me so hard. It felt like disappointment. Whoopi absorbed that. For a moment, the weight of decades sat behind her eyes. Disappointment comes from expectation, she said. And expectation means people believe you can do better. The audience reacted instantly, soft applause rolling through the room, hesitant at first, then growing. Miles nodded slowly. I hadn't thought of it like that. That's why conversations matter, Whoopi said. Even messy ones. The applause grew louder now, the sound filling the studio, breaking the spell just enough to remind everyone where they were. Live television. Millions watching. Social media already lighting up with clipped quotes and half-context reactions. A producer's voice whispered urgently off camera. Time was almost up. One of the co-hosts leaned in. We're running short, she said carefully. But I think this is important. Whoopi nodded. It is. Miles swallowed. I don't regret coming here, he said. Even if it didn't go the way I expected. Whoopi smiled more openly now. Good, she said. Because growth rarely feels comfortable. The audience applauded again, louder this time. Not cheering. Not celebrating. Acknowledging. Miles glanced toward the crowd, visibly overwhelmed. He gave a small nod, as if to say thank you for staying with him through it. But just as the moment seemed to settle, just as the storm looked ready to pass, Whoopi added one more sentence. Quiet, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Just remember, she said, the moment you stop listening is the moment the conversation turns into noise. Miles held her gaze. The weight of the words pressed into him, not as an attack, but as a challenge. I won't forget that, he said. The applause swelled again as the camera began to pull back, the hosts preparing to transition, the audience buzzing with energy that hadn't existed an hour earlier. And yet, beneath the clapping and the polite smiles, everyone knew the truth. This wasn't over. Not for Miles. Not for Whoopi. And definitely not for the millions who would soon replay this moment, slow it down, argue over it, and choose sides, turning a raw, human exchange into a cultural flashpoint. As the cameras faded to commercial, the question lingered in the air, unanswered and uncomfortable. Had they just witnessed reconciliation? Or the calm before a much louder storm? When the cameras cut away, the applause didn't stop right away. It lingered, awkward and unsure, like the audience didn't quite know whether they'd just watched a breakthrough or a breakdown. Miles Teller rose from his chair slowly, shaking hands with the other hosts, offering polite smiles that didn't fully mask the exhaustion on his face. Whoopi stood as well, steady as ever, giving him a nod that carried more meaning than anything she'd said on air. Backstage, the energy was different. No studio lights. No cue cards. Just a quiet hallway humming with whispers. Producers avoided eye contact. Assistants spoke in low voices. Miles walked past a monitor replaying a muted clip of the exchange, his own face frozen mid-sentence, jaw tight, eyes burning. He looked away. Whoopi lingered behind, speaking briefly with a producer, her voice calm, measured. This wasn't new territory for her. She'd been at the center of storms before and knew how fast they spread once released into the wild. Within minutes, the clips were everywhere. Short, sharp edits flooded social media. Miles leaning forward, Whoopi removing her glasses, the moment he cut off a co-host, the pause before his apology. Captions stripped away nuance. Context evaporated. Hashtags exploded. Miles Teller DSRESBCTS Whoopi Goldberg. Whoopi shuts down Hollywood ego. Uncomfortable moment on The View goes viral. Phones buzzed across the studio as staff scrolled in disbelief. The internet had already decided this was a fight, not a conversation. Miles sat alone in his dressing room, jacket tossed over a chair, staring at his phone. Some messages praised him for standing his ground. Others tore him apart, accusing him of entitlement, arrogance, disrespect. The praise felt hollow. The criticism cut deeper than he expected. Across town, Whoopi scrolled too briefly. She'd learned long ago when to stop reading. Still, even she couldn't ignore how fast the narrative was spiraling. People weren't talking about listening anymore. They were choosing sides. By evening, entertainment shows were replaying the segment on loop. Panelists argued over tone and intent. Psychologists analyzed body language. Former guests weighed in. Everyone had an opinion. Miles' name trended worldwide. Some viewers saw a man push too far. Others saw a man who didn't know when to stop talking. Very few talked about the quiet moments, the vulnerability, the pauses, the shift from anger to reflection. The next morning, paparazzi caught Miles outside a cafe. Someone shouted, "Do you regret it?" He didn't answer. He just got into his car and drove away, the question echoing louder than any headline. Whoopi addressed it the following day on the show, briefly. Calmly, without drama. "We had a conversation," she said. "Not everyone liked it. That's okay. Conversations aren't meant to be comfortable." The audience applauded, but the tension remained, because moments like this don't fade. They linger. They evolve. Days later, Miles posted a short statement. Not an apology. Not a defense. Just a reflection. He talked about listening. About learning. About how easy it is to react, and how much harder it is to sit with discomfort. The response was mixed, but different. Slower. Thoughtful. Some fans softened. Others doubled down. The internet never fully forgives, but it does move on. Still, that moment on The View stayed alive, shared, debated, dissected. A reminder of how quickly a conversation can turn into a spectacle. How thin the line is between honesty and backlash. How live television doesn't allow rewrites. And for viewers watching from their screens, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about Miles Teller or Whoopi Goldberg. It was about power, about perception, about who gets to speak, and how we decide to hear them. Now it's your turn. Did Miles cross a line, or was he finally saying what he felt? Did Whoopi push him too hard, or was she holding him accountable? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let the conversation continue. And if you want more explosive, emotional, behind-the-scenes stories like this, subscribe to Stage View, hit like, and share this video with someone who needs to see it. Because the most unforgettable moments aren't scripted. They happen when the cameras are already rolling.